All right, good morning, everyone. My name's Jesse Reed, as Sarah said, and I've been teaching at a few different universities now. So I currently work for Kanagawa University, Musashino University, and Tokyo Medical and Dental University, which just recently had a merger, so I think they're now called Science Tokyo. Trying to keep up with that. Anyway, so today I'm going to be presenting about trying to develop new curriculum for my writing courses. So hopefully this will be something that's useful to everyone. I've been working on this as part of a paper that I'm going to be submitting next year. So this is more of a work in progress preview of what I'll be doing. But I think that hopefully we'll have some useful ideas for you. So anyway, I'm going to get started. And as I continue along, if you have any questions or anything, please um, write them down. Or I think you can actually type them and send them over to Sarah, and she'll collect them for the end. So, all right, everyone, let's get started. So, just one second. All right then. Well, let's begin. So I'm going to just jump right into things, and if you have any questions, just send them to Sarah. So here we go. All right, so here's an overview of the main points I'll be talking about as we continue along. So starting off, I'm just going to give an introduction to the situation and the problem that I identified now with the more common use of AI and large language models, specifically for writing classes. I'll talk a little bit about the methodology that I'm using to try to develop my new curriculum. Um, then I will talk about some of the challenges and limitations of using AI in education. Also, I'll talk about some of the limitations of the curriculum that I'm developing in terms of using it in the classroom, some of the predicted limitations, because I haven't tried this out yet. This is still being developed. Then I'll also talk about how I want to test and evaluate things. And then I'll just conclude my points and we'll go into a Q&A session. So let's see how long things take and how much time we have left at the end. All right. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and large language models. Some of you might already be very familiar with this, and so some of this information might be basic and things like that. But if you aren't as familiar with AI, hopefully this basic primer to things will give you some idea of what we're dealing with. So I just want to, I've been reading up on this subject a bit. And in my research, I've tried to learn a little bit more about how large language models work. For example, the most famous one right now is ChatGPT. There are lots of other AIs, large language models being used right now, but that's the most common one that I've encountered. Um, so just if you're not familiar with how they work, just a quick explanation is they feed huge amounts of documents into these programs that evaluate them and then determine the probability of what the next word in a sentence will be. And then they kind of rank it so that it's able to guess what would be the next word that would make sense in a sentence. And then it just builds on that bigger and bigger until it can make paragraphs and essays and things like that. Um, anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about the impact that's having on education right now. I think it's affecting a lot of fields, not just education for language teachers, but pretty much across the board. And in my readings and my evaluation of things, what I'm thinking is that from the way I've seen it affect education, it seems that it's, for me, it's emphasizing that in the future, skills will be more important than just retention of knowledge. When we have easy access, smartphones already started this process, but now it's snowballing. It will be more important what people can do rather than what they know. Um, Additionally, a lot of times writing is used as an end point in a class. For example, we have a final essay that is used to evaluate our knowledge of the course or how much we've learned. Um, but with AI being able to write essays for people, I don't think this is going to be as effective in the future. So I think writing should be viewed more as a means, not an end. And then finally, some EFL specific concerns. Um, a lot of my students have very practical um, motivations for their language learning, and it's not always about their personal enrichment or development. Sometimes they have a specific, I need to learn this much English to get a job, or I need to be able to do this in English for my professional future. And so with AI being able to assist people in achieving these goals, some people might not care as much whether they have developed the skills personally in a language to not need to rely on an AI. So I'm trying to address these issues specifically in terms of students' motivation. So, all right, let's continue. So the current problems I've been encountering in my writing courses include people using AI and other similar resources can lead to a lack of practice. So when I give them writing assignments for homework or ask them to do things, if they use AI or if they use other sources, they just may not get the practice that they need to. Um, it can also lead to a gap in critical thinking. So, sorry. um, it can lead to a gap in critical thinking where the students have a hard time generating their own ideas. Of course, plagiarism is the biggest issue I think we're facing. When you can ask an ChatGPT to write an entire essay for you, you might do zero work. And finally, in assessment, it's hard for me to assess what the students are doing versus what they might be getting assistance with. So I've been trying to read up on things and try to come up with some ideas of how to adapt my writing curriculum to accommodate these issues, to still encourage students to develop their skills, but in a realistic way. So I'll explain more about that as we go along. Okay, so my personal teaching goals in my writing courses, of course, I want to develop the skills of my students in terms of their writing ability. But now I'm also wanting to teach them how to use AI tools effectively. Um, just like the word processor in the smartphone, I think it's something we can't escape in the future. And so knowing how to use it properly or how to encourage students to use it properly is something that I think we just need to adapt to as teachers. Um, so I still want students to be accountable for their work. And I think one way to do this is to focus on the process of writing rather than the end result and having them report on what they do to me. So as they do each step of the writing process, having them report back on it becomes the assignment rather than the what they produce. And then, of course, just my personal way of teaching is I enjoy using task and peer feedback frequently in many of my classes. So I want to continue incorporating that in the curriculum. So these are the things I've tried to keep in mind as I was working on this. All right, so I've come up with a work in progress first draft of two curriculum models. So the first one I call the standard model because it's the model that matches most commonly to most of the universities I've worked at. We meet once a week. They're on a semester-based system where there's 2 semesters in an academic year. And they have a lot of specialized skills courses. So when I'm teaching writing, it's usually a writing course. But I do teach at another university where they work on a quarter model. We meet bi-weekly, and it's kind of the writing is combined into a braided skills course where we don't just focus on writing. We're also there to develop our speaking and listening skills and things like that. So I decided to go ahead and make 2 sample curriculums, one that matches each of these models, and hopefully this will help explain my situation and maybe give you some ideas for what you could consider in the future if you're dealing with a similar situation as me. So in these curriculum, we'll be using AI, and I'll be encouraging students to do so and including it as part of the course. Hopefully as a way of helping to guide the students to use it in a more ethical manner where they're not just copying everything, but they're using it as part of the development process of their own writing. There and we're emphasizing the writing process so that as we're going through outline and draft, they're using AI to get some feedback in addition to peer review and of course the feedback from me. And I think this is something that will keep them more involved in the writing process rather than just trying to output a final essay. So another way of assessing things is that I want to incorporate progress reports. And what kind of gave me the idea for this is the thesis style that's used in graduate school, where students will work on a writing project, but they'll meet with their advisor and discuss the project. And it's sort of a collaborative, ongoing process. And now, of course, the method I would use in my courses would be a much smaller version, but that sort of interacting collaborative report style is something I wanted to try to incorporate. And then I wanted to focus on AI usage primarily for brainstorming at the early stages of the writing, and then revision in the multiple stages of revision. So that way, even if they are using AI, the students are having to think about what they're writing, think about what changes they're making, look at the process, and hopefully internalize a lot of the things about writing that we're working on. So even if they are using AI, they're still developing ideas, working on them, and engaged in the process. Okay, so one issue about this is in this method, I figured there needs to be a way for students to be accountable for their writing and a way for them to get feedback as we continue along. So one way I came up with is that we would incorporate reports and presentations. So maybe they're giving some reports on what they're doing, or even depending on the structure of the class, a full presentation. And they can do it in groups or in front of the whole class, depending on their level, our time, and how things are going along in the course. So, of course, depending on class size as well. Additionally, peer review is something I enjoy incorporating in my writing classes because I think it helps the students when they get a chance to see what someone else is doing, rather than just getting feedback from the teacher only. And so I think this is something that would continue, I would continue to keep in my writing courses. But additionally, they would also be getting peer review from the AI as well. So when they're doing the revision process with ChatGPT or whatever they can access, they could input what they've written and get feedback on it from the AI, as well as their classmates, and then of course the feedback I give them. So that would give them multiple input that would let them develop their ideas. And then finally, depending on time and availability, I'm considering incorporating oral interviews where I interview the students about their project. So we would sit down, um, and I would talk to them about what they're writing, what they've done so far, and how that's coming along. And this could be done in the classroom or online, depending on time and availability. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the curriculum I've developed. So I said there were two primary styles. And so this is a work in progress first draft. So I will probably change some of this as I will continue working on the project. But I just wanted to point out a few examples of what I'm talking about in the actual curriculum. So let's take a look here. Um, so as you can see, I've broken it down by week. This is the one where we meet in semesters and we meet once per week. So as you can see, um, I'm wanting to introduce the students to the use of AI and in particular its flaws, because AI does have some very important limitations, and making students aware of this would be important for them to realize they need to check what they get. They can't just take what's output and take that as being perfect. Additionally, I can't assume that all of the students are really personally familiar with AI. I know many of them are, but there might be some who've never tried it out or don't really know what it does. So this would be the opportunity to introduce them to it, to show them how it works, and to also talk about what usage of AI will be acceptable in my class and what types of usage are not. And then as we continue along, it would be incorporated into the writing process. As you can see here, some of the courses, some of the sessions would focus on AI, but some of them would be standard writing focused courses. So that way, the class isn't about AI, it's just incorporating AI as a tool to help them develop their writing. Hopefully that would help them along. As we continue through the class, you can see that I'm incorporating uh, sessions with peer review and feedback, but still breaking it down into the different parts of writing as one would do in a typical writing focused course. Um, and then as we get towards the end, uh, I still would give them some homework assignments where I would ask them to use the AI for grammar checks or uh, to take screenshots and send them to me of the feedback they received from the AI, and then maybe a brief description of how they would like to incorporate that into their project and things like that. So as we take a look at the quarter curriculum, where it's broken up into 7-week quarters, it's the similar situation. The only difference is in this curriculum, I've broken the writing tasks into 4 different types of writing to try to keep it fresh for the students because it's over the course of an entire year, um, and we're meeting twice a week. So what I did here was at Quarter 1 focuses on informative writing, where we would just mainly talk about how to explain things descriptively. And then Quarter 2, we talk about comparative writing, and I would give them tasks related to that as well. But still, as you look into the curriculum, you'll see that I'm still incorporating AI as I did in the standard model, but trying to blend it into my typical writing course. So finding a way to balance what I would normally teach in a writing class versus the use of AI by the students primarily for brainstorming and revision purposes. Then in Quarter 3, we talk about persuasive writing, and continue into Quarter 4, where we talk about problem and solution style writing. So basically, in each quarter, we're working towards one final essay of the style that we've been studying. They would be submitting drafts as we continue, like a first draft and a second draft and things like that. But unlike before, where I evaluated them on the drafts that they're submitting, in this model, I would be evaluating them more on their personal description or explanation of how they developed that draft. So the essay itself is still part of the evaluation, but it's not the primary component. It's just one part of how I'm evaluating them. And that's the model I'm trying to develop for this. It's still something I'm working on. So one thing I'm still trying to figure out is the grading percentages that I think would be well suited to this. Um, Obviously, I want the drafts that they produce to be a significant percentage of the grade, but I'm also wanting their explanations and reports on how they develop the drafts to be significant as well. So this is something that I've noted, and I'm continuing to, I'm doing some research, and for the paper I'm developing, this is something I hope to address by the time I write it and publish it later. So, okay. So I just wanted to show a little sample of the curriculum I came up with, and then now I'm going to talk about how I hope to incorporate that, incorporate AI usage into that. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is focus on how to teach AI usage in the class. So these are a few primary points that I came up with as being important for introducing students to using AI in the class. So the first one here is prompt engineering. So this is a term I came across, which basically means how are you able to describe to the AI what you want to do? So in other words, if you like, again, I know some of you might be very familiar with AI, but I'm explaining this just for those of you who might not be as familiar with how to use it. So when you're using the large language model, you have to type in what you want to do. So you might, which I'll show you a few examples in a minute. But basically what it comes down to is the more detailed information and the more specific information you give, the better result you tend to get because you're able to define your parameters more effectively, and then it's able to give you a more specialized result. So explaining this to the students will be helpful because then they can start thinking about, okay, if I want to brainstorm some ideas for an essay, I could just say, please give me some ideas for a comparative essay. But the results would be very randomized. It might not be anything like what I want. On the other hand, if I can think and come up with a very detailed paragraph explaining the parameters I want for my comparative essay, what are the points of comparison that I want to have, what tone I want to use. Do I want to use textual support from sources, things like that. Then I can get something much better and more in line with what I want for the product I'm trying to create. So that's primarily what I'm looking for in prompt engineering. Then critical evaluation, this basically comes down to educating the students about what AI can't do or what limitations it has, which we'll talk more about later. But it's very important for the students to be aware of the limitations of AI because they could get misinformation, they could have unintentional bias. There's numerous problems that can come up if they go and blindly use AI. So if I explain to them these things about the limitations and how AI can make mistakes or incorporate untrue information, then hopefully that can help them to avoid these problems, but also be more mindful about the process of revision. Personal integration is basically just the idea that I want to encourage the students to look at what they write as an expression of their personal ideas. So they shouldn't want an AI to just output something randomly. They should want to develop something that is an expression of their own ideas and preferences. So they would work with the AI in a collaborative way to make sure that the revisions they're making are improving their own writing rather than just producing something. And then finally, reflection and learning is where, by looking back at the process as they've developed the drafts and as they've gotten feedback from the AI and their peers and their teacher, hopefully will make them retain more of the retain more of what they've done and improve their skills and mindfulness of their skills so that they can end up being better writers, even though they are using this tool. So here I just have an example here of I went on ChatGPT and I asked it to generate some ideas for brainstorming. So you can see here, it gave me about 12 results, but I've cut them off because obviously they wouldn't all fit on the slide. But as you can see, I just typed in the prompt here. This is a basic starting point. So if a student used this, they would just get a lot of results that might be what they want, might not be. So what I would try to do is tell them how they could improve this by adding more parameters. Maybe they already have some ideas about what things they want to compare between this. So in this example, I used Android smartphones versus Apple smartphones. But if the student already knows they have some ideas about it, they could say, specifically focus on things like price or availability or popularity or whatever other parameters they think are important, then they can focus the AI in a certain direction and get a lot more specialized results that are better. So this is something I would go over on the first day of class and talk about how to use this effectively. Here's an example of where I was trying to use an AI to help me revise something. So I took an example from an essay that I had, and then I wrote what I want the AI to do. I gave it the instructions that I would like it to analyze my writing sample, but then I told it about some of the specific areas that I was looking for, and I asked it if it could suggest any areas of focus that I might be overlooking about this topic. And then I copy and pasted the sample of writing that I wanted to use, which was from the introduction section. I've cut it off here because, again, space, but then the AI was able to give me some responses to what I submitted, and it gave me some suggestions in terms of my writing style, the content and focus, and it even gave me some suggestions for what I could incorporate into the other parts of the essay. So I was able to get much more specialized, helpful results by asking more specific questions. So this is something I would want to highlight for my students so that they could think about this as well. And here's an example of some of the results I got from the prompt I just showed you previously. I've cut them off down here at the bottom, but this is just the first part of the results I got. And so you can see it gave me some ideas for clarifying the terminology I was using. It gave me some explanation of maybe some of the distinctions between the physician-assisted death and physician-assisted suicide and MAID, which is a pretty nuanced difference. So it was a good result. I thought this would be helpful in developing the essay. So this is something I think the students would benefit from using. And more importantly, it gives multiple options. So the students have to choose which sort of ideas are more aligned with what they're wanting to do. And in the process, hopefully, think about what they're doing so that they're more mindful of their own writing and the choices they're making. So, all right, so I want to talk about some of the limitations of AI that I've observed from my readings, but also some of the limitations of the curriculum I'm developing that I think problems there might be in the classroom. So let's start with AI first. All right, so some of the general limitations of AI, which I touched on earlier. One, AI has some biases built into it. And this is because they train AI, large language models, on writing produced by human beings. So they take huge amounts of writing that people have done, and then they train the AI on it. Now, they do try to program in some parameters and things like that to avoid the AI just going wild. But as human beings, there's still limitations on how much they can do. So things will sneak in there. And yeah, so it's been observed that for example, in one of my readings, I found that the way AI writes example essays is tonally very similar to one specific category of people. And what they found was that it matched up primarily with people who were from a wealthy background, who maybe attended private schools, and primarily Caucasian and male. That's what they found statistically in that research. Now, of course, I'll do some other research as well, but the limitation of that would be that the biases built into the AI are making it write in a specific style universally. So if everyone just copies what it does, everyone's writing will be the same, which I think would have some drawbacks. So that's something I would talk to my students about. An additional problem of using AI is that um, even though it's able to reproduce what other people have written, it's, as far as they currently know, it's still not a thinking, living being. So some of the nuance of what you might want to incorporate into your writing in terms of emotional content or appeal to people's ideas might be missing. Or even worse, you might get the wrong nuance in your writing. And this is especially dangerous for EFL learners because they're working in a second language. So subtle nuance of language is something that's difficult for second language users comparatively to native speakers. So they might unintentionally take what the AI produces as being always correct or being the right example. On a side note related to this, I found that a lot of my students, at least as second language users, sometimes, especially here in Japan, sometimes have a hard time recognizing or admitting that native speakers can make mistakes. And I think by having them work with an AI and pointing out that these mistakes or limitations or unintentional errors, it could possibly help them recognize the mistakes inherent in all language users and hopefully build their confidence in their own language, but also make them not take whatever they hear a native speaker use as being the only truth. So hopefully that could be something beneficial to them as in general. And then finally, garbage in, garbage out is a term used in programming that means if you input things poorly or in a limited manner, then what you will get back will also be poor and limited. So, kind of touching back on prompt engineering from earlier, explaining to my students that what they use the AI for, how well they use it on their end, will affect the quality of what they get back, is something that I think will hopefully encourage them not to just use it blindly, but to use it mindfully. So, all right. Also, in my research, I've been looking into some genre-specific limitations of AI. For example, in informative writing, of course, the information that you present should always be very accurate and true. AI has a problem with hallucinations. This is when AI will invent things that don't exist when you ask it questions if it doesn't know the answer. Sometimes if you ask it something, it will say it can even invent facts and details, dates, names, places, citations that don't exist. So, of course, that's very dangerous for students to trust that always. And hopefully, if I point that out to them, that will also, in a way, scare them away from using it too blindly. So if they realize that AI can make mistakes and then they could be graded on those mistakes, hopefully they'll be more careful. They'll double and triple check what they get. All right. Additionally, in terms of other styles of writing, I found that with comparative writing, AI could run into some limitations with limited scope. So, like I said earlier, there are some biases built into AI. So, if you're wanting to compare some aspects of your topics, it might only focus on the most common or popular aspects because it's drawing upon a huge amount of common writing. So, it's going to automatically default to what's most popular or most common. Persuasive writing, the problem is nuance. It's that the AI might not be as effective as appealing to the emotions or ideas that you want to appeal to in your audience. And finally, with problem solving, um, if you rely on AI for your ideas, again, you'll run into problems with limiting your own critical thinking. So these are things I will address in my class and try to explain to my students about why they should be careful when they try to use AI in their writing. All right, so when I've been evaluating this curriculum, these two uh, curriculum I came up with, they some of the possible limitations or problems I came up with in terms of actually applying them to the classroom. Well, the first one that seemed pretty obvious to me is that if you have very large class sizes, it would be very difficult to incorporate a lot of the interaction and feedback that I'm hoping to use in this style of teaching. Um, so, for example, at some of my universities, some of my classes are thankfully on the smaller side, under 20 students. But I do have some other classes at different universities where we're up closer to 40. And for people who teach at other universities, sometimes we have 50, 60, 100 person classes. Um, and in that size of class, it would be practically impossible to incorporate all of these ideas about one-on-one oral interviews, and personalized feedback and things like that. And that's definitely a limitation of this style of teaching. So that's one thing I'm trying to consider as I continue working on the paper that I'm hoping to submit next year. So that's one thing I'm going to try to address in my reading and see if I can find some possible solution. Um, some preliminary ideas possibly include uh, increasing group work, like in terms of presenting your ideas to the groups and then submitting them to the teacher in a written format. Um, but I'm still working on that. All right, another limitation is mixed proficiency levels. Sometimes, unfortunately, when we're teaching classes, we get students with very widely different language levels. We hope that they're within a certain range of each other, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so, depending on the students you get, if you're trying to um, give them the freedom to develop their writing, but you have students who are very, basic second language users in terms of their capabilities, um, they could easily feel overwhelmed. And the reliance on group work or group peer feedback could be overwhelming to students who don't have the proficiency level necessary to engage. So that's something that I'm taking into consideration as well. Um, I think if you can find time for the oral interviews one-on-one where you actually have a chance to speak to the students directly, then it would be easier to try to offer more scaffolding for the students whose levels are too low. Of course, in a perfect world, we would have our students in the classes be in fairly close proficiency levels, but it doesn't always work out that way. So it's a problem I'm trying to figure out how to address. Of course, the third problem is student engagement. So this style of teaching, I think, would require students to be fairly engaged. Doesn't always happen. So if students are wanting to just get it done with, they're not wanting to take the time to think things through, to consider the ideas that we're going over, then we could run into that problem. And there's not an easy solution for that. So hopefully just breaking it down into digestible pieces would help students work with this, so that even if they are highly engaged or not, they'll still recognize the importance of doing the work that you assign and then can work through it. And finally, time management, and this is more on the teacher's end. It can be difficult to find time to meet with students for one-on-one oral interviews, to schedule reports or presentations. So time management will be a tight issue in this. But as I'm working on the curriculum, I do think it's doable, but it does require some careful planning. So as I said earlier, here's a couple of suggestions for how I could try to adapt to limitations. More use of peer groups, group rotation to keep the people they're interacting with changing. So that way, if their first group has a big gap in terms of their proficiency level, maybe if I keep rotating them, the levels will change. And so they'll be getting feedback from different people of different levels so they can adapt to it. Offering one-on-one support as much as possible, although again, I recognize that this is difficult based on time. And of course, I'll try to generate student feedback in the class so that I can use that feedback as a way of adapting the curriculum from year to year. So one way is to incorporate their feedback as part of their writing assignments. And then, of course, the outcomes of the assessments that I have in the class, I'll use that to guide future developments. So, um, so my next step is implementation, incorporating presentations or reports on the process where the student has to explain what they're doing how are they writing, how are they using AI, what changes are they making to their paper and why, and staged writing. So emphasizing the importance of starting with an outline, making a first draft, the changes you make as you move through drafts until you get to a final stage, rather than trying to jump, because a lot of students do want to jump. I have a lot of students who don't want to do drafts. They say, can I just write the final paper straight away? And so I have to kind of slow things down. All right, and then finally, additionally, future considerations include AI is developing constantly, so the capabilities of AI may continue to change. So I have to keep that in mind. If I am going to use it as a tool, I have to keep up on how it works as much as possible. Of course, student performance and student feedback I'll try to use that to influence the ongoing development of the curriculum. So we'll see what comes out of that. All right, everyone. I hopefully that I had some useful information, and let's take some time for some questions if you have any. All right.